They saw what broke you and stayed quiet. That silence was never innocent. Your tears told the truth before your mouth ever could. They know your problem, but they preferred your silence. They watched you unravel and called it overreacting. God saw the moment you were blamed for your own pain. You weren't wrong. You were just surrounded by cowards. They know what they did. That's why they flinch at your joy. Your healing terrifies those who fed on your ruin. You outgrew the lie. That's why they resent your light. They know your struggle, and they used it against you. They were not confused. They were calculated. You're not dramatic. You're just no longer controllable. God whispered your name louder than their gossip ever could. You are not crazy. You are always inconvenient to their script. They don't want you healed. They want you manageable. You cried in rooms that never deserved your truth. They know exactly who they were when you needed saving. You weren't too sensitive. You were too awake. They recognized your problem. They just didn't want to carry it. They used your past like a weapon and called it concern. Your pain was their entertainment. Your silence is your power. You spoke with trembling lips. They laughed with steady hands. God is lifting you from what they kept you buried in. They know your pain. They just pretended not to. You broke open, and they blamed your fragments. What they know is guilt. What you carry is truth. You were always too much for their smallness. They know your wounds, but they chose not to be bandages. You trusted them with the storm. They left when it rained. They don't speak your name now. Guilt has a quiet tongue. You gave them sacred. They gave you silence. They know the bruise. They just didn't expect it to speak. They never denied it. They just hid behind excuses. God kept record of the moments you had to pretend you were okay. They saw you drowning and offered mirrors, not lifelines. You kept their secrets. They used yours to shame you. They labeled your weakness before they asked your story. You were a mirror they couldn't bear to look into. You suffered in their hands. Now they suffer your absence. They know your heartbreak. They helped shape it. You weren't loud. You were finally heard. They called you broken while hiding the hammer. They know what happened. That's why they avoid your eyes. God is revealing what your silence tried to protect. They left you crying and still tell people they cared. You were the secret they feared would speak. They know your problem. They just wanted it to remain yours. You deserved understanding, not surveillance. They know your breaking point. They just didn't expect your rebirth. If this touched your soul, don't scroll. Comment your favorite quote and subscribe for more. You were never fragile. You were grieving. They remembered your mistakes, but God remembered your tears. You were the truth they weren't brave enough to love. They saw the fire, but blamed you for the smoke. God saved the receipts. Don't worry. They didn't forget your pain. They feared your healing. You were shamed for surviving. Not anymore. They know your wounds, but they still held the knife. You deserved tenderness. They gave you tactics. They know your ache. They just cared more about image. They noticed the pain. They just enjoyed the power. You wanted comfort. They brought critique. They called you too emotional. That's how they dismissed your soul. Your healing is making them uncomfortable. Let it. They don't speak on what happened, because it indicts them. They wore compassion like a costume. Your story haunts them because they thought you'd never tell it. You were honest. They were only strategic. They know your truth. That's why they rewrite the past. God is not finished defending you. They said they loved you, but loved their comfort more. They watched you bleed and still asked for more. You were the lesson they refused to learn. They didn't misunderstand you. They underestimated you. God saw what they did with your name in private. You tried to heal with the very ones who hurt you. They didn't check on you because they knew they caused it. You deserve softness, not suspicion. Their silence now is louder than their lies were. You weren't asking for much, just for truth. They fed off your brokenness like a ritual. You were always divine. They just couldn't control that. They dismissed your pain like background noise. You screamed through smiles, and they never looked deeper. God is restoring what they tried to redefine. You carried a story no one dared hold. Their guilt is louder than your name in their mind. You asked for presence. They gave you pity. They remember every tear you wept. It's burning now. You became the silence they can't outrun. They didn't want you to heal, because healed you see clearer. You were not the problem. You were the prophecy. They noticed your glow dim, but said nothing. You were blamed because they couldn't be brave. They can't face you now. That's the truth speaking. Your healing invalidates their narrative. That's why they disappear. They prayed for you once. Now they're praying you forget. You gave your trust. They gave you trauma. Your peace now is proof you weren't crazy. The story they hide from, God is bringing to light. You were divine in the wrong hands. They heard your truth and chose comfort over change. You're not angry. You're just awakened. They know your story. They just hope no one else hears it. You were loyal to a lie. That's what hurts. They don't reach out now. Guilt's hands are heavy. You loved through chaos. They just loved the control. You deserved repair, not retreat. They remember the moment you stopped explaining. God saw when you wept alone, whispering their name. They know your problem. They created it. Your presence was light. They wanted shadow. You didn't change. You just stopped bending. They'll never admit it. But they broke what they couldn't build. You asked to be heard. They treated it like noise. They rehearsed love, but forgot the action. You were the realest thing in their illusion. They know you're done, and that's what hurts now. You were chosen for higher. That's why they couldn't stay. They know your weakness. They just never imagined your strength. Their memory of you is full of regret. You showed up fully. They showed up when convenient. They saw your cry for help and watched. You were made for gentleness. That's why it hurt. God is turning your sorrow into judgment. They know the whole truth. That's why they hide. You left, and peace followed. God is confronting what you couldn't. They weaponized your love. Now they fear your freedom. You were never hard to love, just hard to deceive. They knew your needs. They just chose their ego. They confused your patience for permission. You didn't walk away. You were released. They know your truth. It's what keeps them up now. They didn't expect your healing to be this loud. You were the garden. They were never meant to harvest. They gaslit your grief. God is igniting your fire. You broke the curse by surviving. Their shame is finally louder than your silence. You'll never need to explain again. God saw it all. You weren't too much. They were too little. They studied your pain, but never learned your power. You were never the problem. You were the test. If this touched your soul, don't scroll. Comment your favorite quote and subscribe for more.